Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Today's day 4 of the She Is Me conference, and this is our panel, Project 2025 and the Assault on Women's Rights. We are going to go around the room and have everyone introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about themselves. Casey?
Hi, my name is Casey Rogers, and I am one of the co-founders of the organization I Know Why She Stayed. Our mission, in a nutshell, is to expose the connection between domestic and financial abuse.
Kimberly?
My name is Kimberly Monday. I'm just an all-around grunt. If someone calls me up and says they have something that needs to be done, I try and help do it. That's just not creative, just helpful.
And Kimberly co-hosts the She Is Me podcast.
Oh, that too.
Yeah. Dr. Christy King.
Yes, hello. I am Christy King. I'm a board-certified family physician, and I have extra specialized training in women's health, integrative and functional medicine, and I am the co-founder of She Is Me Health, where we're really building a paradigm with women at the center.
Hazel.
Hi, I'm Hazel Krebs. I'm an author and speaker, inspiring the world to live enthusiastically. I work for my company called Enthusiastically You, LLC. I'm also transgender. I live in the Midwest, and so much of these topics are things I've been dealing with for a while.
Thank you. Johnny.
Johnny J. Ganiki, Juweri Natachi Chataniki. My name is Johnny J, and I'm from the Otoe, Missouri and Choctaw tribes out of Oklahoma, currently living in LA. I'm the founder of Red Pop News and a board member of Crushing Colonialism, where we try to support our Indigenous storytellers to create change in the world.
Thank you. Anjali?
Hi, everyone. I'm Anjali Mehta. I'm an international human rights and humanitarian law lawyer and founder of the nonprofit What is the Power of We, which is a global initiative building a digital hub to connect survivors of gender-based violence, advocates, and organizations. My background spans representing governments before international courts and the United Nations to working alongside grassroots movements in over a dozen countries. I'm really excited for this conversation today because I think it's the foundation of another grassroots movement that is coming.
Thank you. So we're going to start with telling the audience what Project 2025 is. There's some of us who read it when it came out and have studied it, and some who aren't quite up to speed. So we're just going to give you a quick overview. Project 2025 is a comprehensive conservative policy blueprint developed by the Heritage Foundation and supported by an alliance of over 100 conservative organizations. It provides a detailed roadmap for transforming the federal government and implementing conservative policies in a future Republican presidential administration. The initiative is built on 4 main pillars: a nearly 900-page policy guide called Mandate for Leadership 2025, a personal database to identify conservative candidates for government positions, a presidential administration academy for training future administration officials, and a 180-day action playbook for immediate implementation. Project 2025 proposes significant changes across nearly all areas of government, including restructuring federal agencies, immigration and border policies, reproductive rights, LGBTQ plus protections, law enforcement, economic regulations, and social programs. The plan emphasizes reducing the size of the federal government, centralizing executive power, and implementing traditional conservative values. Supporters argue that Project 2025 provides clear, actionable plans for efficient governance, restores traditional conservative principles and values, reduces bureaucratic inefficiency and government overreach, and strengthens executive authority to implement unified policies. Critics warn that Project 2025 threatens democratic institutions, checks and balances, politicizes the civil service and law enforcement, imposes extreme social policies that limit individual rights, and risks undermining essential government programs and protections. This session is designed to spark transformation, truth-telling, and forward motion. Please bring your lived experience, insight, and vision for change. Be bold, be raw, and be real. Our first question: what does Project 2025 reveal about the future being planned for women's rights and autonomy?
Happy to jump into this one, Lisa. So, I mean, broadly, I mean, it's obviously a play for control. Sovereign, awakened women are very dangerous because women are the creators, right? And so it's just kind of in the same way it's necessary to control land and property. It's also important to control women's biology, and women remembering their biology and activating that biology is extremely threatening to these structures. So I can completely understand that. But I think, obviously what we must do as women is remember our biology as sacred and become ungovernable. So,
Casey?
Yeah. By forcing women to lose their autonomy, they are also creating a dynamic where we no longer have choices about reproduction, and that has a huge impact on our ability to have jobs and meaningful careers, and it impacts us economically in ways that it's very subversive. One of the things that I like to quote in I Know Why She Stayed when I'm talking about presentations is that because women are so busy and we're so productive and we have so many things that we do in our life, a lot of times we haven't really put the pieces of the puzzle together in terms of how we've been impacted. But just the gender wage gap alone, women lose $1.6 trillion annually. So when you think about that, and you think about the fact that we have so many additional economic burdens like the pink tax, the fact that childcare, a lot of times men aren't paying for, childcare when there's a divorce. There are so many things that add into the economic equation, and that really prevents us from participating equally in politics, because most of the time in politics, the person that raises the most money is the winner of the prize. So there are all these things that they're trying to implement that impact us even further economically, adding to the burden of why it takes us so long. We still haven't ratified the ERA in this country. So so I'm all about the economy part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I might maybe jump in and agree with both of you, and maybe take a step back and just kind of list out the specific ways that Project 2025 is targeting women's rights and autonomy, and maybe starting from there. And then actually, I think that's a really interesting question, because you use the word reveal, and I think it reveals more about the folks who put together Project 2025 than anything else. So the first part, let me just kind of list out, what Project 2025 says from a policy perspective, which is limiting or banning abortion access, which includes medication abortion, eroding contraceptive coverage via things like employer religious exemptions, restricting fertility and IVF treatment, restricting access to medication, rewriting Title IX and Title VII sex discrimination protections, and overall really narrowing what counts as women's rights and what falls into this idea of women's rights. And I think going to that second question, what this reveals, and we had been talking about this a little bit before the panel started, but it reveals a fear, and it reveals the weakness of a group of people clinging to a status quo that is crumbling. And I think there's a reason why there are not only politicians and 100 groups behind Project 2025, but also billionaires supporting the current administration and Project 2025 efforts. It represents, I think, as well, this late stage capitalism at the brink of collapse, and this fear that the status quo is about to be upended. So just wanted to throw that in the mix there as well.
Absolutely. And something that Christy and I talk about with She Is Me Health is the out-of-pocket health expenses that women have, billions of dollars every year, and that's without these new laws going into place, without these changes being made. So not only are we being denied health care, but the poverty is being thrust upon us just to be able to get health care. Right?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to also remember that for Indigenous and Black women, none of this is hypothetical. Like this is already our lived reality. We've already been here. We've already had to address this in our communities in many ways, right? Because especially for Indigenous women, our bodies have already been sites of state control, forced sterilizations, boarding school abuse, medical neglect that we still deal with today. When you look at the mortality rates in our communities, they're higher than any other community, right? Like, especially for women. And we talked about this yesterday in talking about femicide. And one of the reasons that specifically Indigenous and Black women have always been targeted for this systemic violence is the fact that in our communities, we are the backbone. And we've always had power and autonomy. We've always had freedom in our reproductive choices. And even now, abortion is not taboo in our culture. With Project 2025, it brings up a lot of questions because we are sovereign nations. And so we've had a lot of women asking, well, why don't reservations set up abortion clinics as means of bypassing that? Not realizing that the US government still controls the scope of our sovereignty. And with the funding that we receive for Indian Health Services, it already restricts abortion within our communities. It cannot fund abortions. So in order to get an abortion, even if it is medically necessary, oftentimes you have to be referred out just because IHS won't cover it because of that very reason. So our reproductive choices as Indigenous women are very, very much restricted already. Like this is already like Project 2025 just takes the blueprint and applies it to every other woman. And I think that's something that we really need to be aware of because this is already the lived experience of many women in our country.
Mm-hmm. And that leads us to our next question. It's a very good segue, by the way. Which freedoms are most immediately under threat? And where are we already seeing these policies quietly taking root?
Well, I think reproductive rights are the most obvious. I have a close friend that lives in a red state and experienced a miscarriage and was afraid to go to the doctors because she was afraid she would get charged with murder.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's there.
Yeah.
It's
Hazel?
in a red state.
Yeah.
And she, I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone?
No, go ahead, Kimberly.
Oh, my daughter lives in the red state and she's going to be 40 and she's going to have a hysterectomy. And this has been brewing for 6 months and the hoops that she's had to jump through in that state that I know she wouldn't have had to jump through here are significant. But one thing I did want to point out is that one of the most insidious areas of attack to our rights is what they take away from our children.
Mm-hmm.
Because then they are able to more or less grab us where it hurts. And I know for me, when I was a single mother and I was trying to, raise my kids, and as medical care got more expensive for them, as everything else got more expensive for them, it really restricted my ability to branch out in any way, shape, or form. It's another way that keep you locked into your situation, locked into a job perhaps that you don't want because you need to have the medical care, as we've discussed, and so forth. But I think for a lot of women, what they're afraid of is they're afraid of the attack on their children as well.
Yeah. Yes.
And that's a great,
Absolutely.
yeah, I've been great. And I agree with that. And the medical restrictions have been affecting the trans community in so many different ways, particularly the children. And these are life-saving care. And this is care that's administered by a counselor and I'm on hormone therapy that many people are on, but they're trying to restrict it from me because I don't fit the mold, trying to restrict it from kids, blaming parents for the stuff that's happening. You know, with having a queer child is almost a crime. I live in a red state. I live on the border of another red state. And it's just like headline after headline. And they've been doing it at the state level. That's happening at the national level. I live in Kansas, and some of these definitions, some of these restrictions have been in place to force us to move, force us to be hidden, force us to fit into a box, just over and over again on a smaller scale.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that, because it's also, you know, when you really look at the way that women have been impacted directly, I mean, it's since COVID, we've lost like, what is it, like 12.2 million jobs, because of the way that we've been forced to leave the workplace in order to be able to provide childcare, to take care of the children.
Right. Yeah.
But even just this year, you start seeing the way that, like, for especially like the gender restrictions and the racial bias that's coming back in, you know, Black women have lost over 300,000 jobs just this year. And, you know, you start seeing this, women are leaving the workforce. But when you look at the progress that we've made in our economy, it has been through women, through our, you know, like entrepreneurship and the way that we've been able to manage leadership, because we're problem solvers, right? Like, we've been able to grow these thriving economies. And so now you have women who are being forced out of these workplaces and, you know, being told that they're these DEI hires, that they're just there to fill a quota. When you look at the educational background of most women, and it's incredible, like the accomplishments that they've been able to manage on top of raising families. And, you know, the assault on children, you know, I think really hits home for a lot of women, right? Because we do have that protective just nature inside of us to protect like our littles.
Our littles.
And we see them being attacked. We see states like Florida that are removing age restrictions on work requirements, and putting children in very dangerous situations. Tennessee has had several incidences just this year of teenagers being killed or losing limbs in dangerous work situations that they never should have been in the first place. And we see all this going to, and we just see more attacks on the children, right? More attacks on that innocence and trying to take it away. Even with trans children, you know, in Indian country, we deal with a whole generation of stolen children who've been forcefully removed from their families and put into adoption. And we see that starting to happen with trans kids now. That threat of being removed from the home and adopted out to more traditional families to be corrected, to be fixed, the same way that it was like kill the Indian, save the man. We see that same strategy being just used over and over and over again. And I think that's something really is a good guideline for how we can start building more solidarity between women, is starting to look at what has already been, the work that has already been done. Laws that are already in place that are still being challenged, like the Indian Child Welfare Act. You know, since probably like the last 10 years, there hasn't been a year when there hasn't been a challenge brought against that law by conservative think tanks. And it's not just an effort to hurt the children, but it's to also undermine our sovereignty as Indigenous people, because our identities, you know, are not race-based, and they're kind of dependent on that socio-political relationship that we have within our tribes as citizens of our nations, but also as dual citizens of the United States as well. So, you know, these laws come under, they try to find ways to undermine, because once they can racialize our identities as Indigenous people, where there goes our sovereignty, because it is now considered a race-based, I guess you would say, like, favor race-based laws, which the Constitution does not allow for these laws to be in place if they're based like to give an upper hand, right? So they're trying to find ways to undermine, trying to find ways to undo a lot of the progress that we've made. And it's very sneaky the way that they do it and the way that they word it, because from If you're not from an indigenous community and you're being told, oh, well, they're sovereign nations, why do they get to exist aside from the US government? Oh, our tax money is going to fund them. Oh, we're paying for them to be sovereign. When that's not the reality. A lot of the funding that we receive are treaty rights. It is basically the United States paying rent to tribes for being able to occupy this land. And in that vein, it's just everything. We're kind of like the canary in the gold mine. Whatever they can get away with doing with us, whatever they can get you to justify that is being done to us, is an okay for them to start testing it on other people. Like, it's never going to be just us. It is going to come for everyone else as well. But it's that desensitization that happens, right? Because you're like, oh, okay, well, that's not so bad. It's just them. It's not me. It has nothing to do with me. And we saw this a lot with Standing Rock, right? We saw indigenous people literally being under attack by state-sanctioned violence with tanks, with rubber bullets, with being drenched in freezing water while it's freezing outside. We saw these attacks happening, but there were so many justifications that were being made. Oh, well, they shouldn't be doing this. They shouldn't be doing that. Not looking at the cause of what they were actually doing, which was fighting for their right to protect the water, to have clean water, to have land that is unsoiled, to be able to protect their communities from the sexual violence that comes from man camps that inevitably follow the pipelines. And so I think those are like really important things that we also just really need to be aware of. Like, nothing that happens to Black, Indigenous, or trans women just stops with us. It is going to happen to everyone else.
Right. You're absolutely right. So why now? What cultural or political forces have reignited the push to control women's bodies, voices, and choices?
I think politically, this has been coming for a long, long time. We have organizations out there like ALEC crafting legislation to pass through, various red states. And it's all very well organized and something that has been in the works. Even though it's Project 2025, they've been trying to do these things for decades and decades. And they finally found a useful idiot who, some people find him charismatic. I don't get it, but they do. And I think it's all about timing. It's all about timing. The timing, the doors were wide open. I think one of the things that I think people were trying to push back on is they hated the idea that we could potentially have a woman president, or we had a Black president.
Black woman president.
Yeah, exactly. And it's kind of like, oh, we can't go there. There's just so much racism behind everything that's going on right now. And not to, promote my own work, but I wrote a book called The Color of Frost, and it's set in 1974. And the reason why I set it in 1974 is because a lot of the things that are going on today are mirrored in things that happened 50 years ago. They didn't, attack DEI back then because it wasn't really a popular term. But what they did attack was multiculturalism. And it was at a time when women couldn't get a mortgage, and it had to have a cosigner on a bank account, or like they couldn't get a credit card. So what the book does, it starts off with the resignation of Nixon. It mirrors what's happening today to show people what we will lose if we go down this rabbit hole. And, the education that we've been able to get is largely due to the fact that seats weren't filled during the Vietnam War. And we were finally allowed to get into programs that gave us professional degrees. So it's hard to say why now, but I think that this is, again, it's been in the works for a long, long time. And the door was just wide open with the current administration and the administration from, 2016.
Mhm.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And I think from a legal perspective too, we have seen the placement of Republican and extreme right-wing judges, not just on the Supreme Court level. That was where this has all culminated, right? And we can talk about how that is an example of the executive branch capturing our three branches of government, right? But that's the culmination of decades and decades of work putting extreme right activist judges on federal panels, state panels across the country. And that, I think, in turn, plus a populist president, plus the opportunity for a case like Dobbs to make it to the Supreme Court, all of these things, as
The shadow docket.
they open the door. Yep, open the door to a rollback of rights, not just on the federal level at the Supreme Court, but something that has been happening for decades on a state and federal level, but within states as well.
I think in communities too, because how many school boards were taken over? The consolidation of media. When you look at who owns the media at this point,
Yes.
it is so consolidated. And when they start screaming about the liberal media, I just want to throw up. Because it's just not true.
Yeah, it's very
Yeah.
much been a grand plan, and everything's
It's
been
not
moving around.
I also, going through this last night, I went from page 1 all the way through. And one of the things that stood out to me most that I think allows them to get away with a lot of this is the symbiotic relationship between all of the three-letter agencies and how they each support each other in different ways. And as we all have alluded to, this has been going on since Reagan. And over time, they have been able to modify, if not bastardize, each one of those agencies so that it no longer holds up what the initial mission statement was, which was to help the American people. And along with Citizens United, all of it has been turned into holding up corporations. And corporations are run by men, predominantly.
Yeah.
And that's what they're afraid of. They don't want to be taxed. They don't want to lose their power. They don't want any of that. And they're going to go through every little bit of sinew that they can between everything in order to weaken it. So, and by doing that, though, it makes it, even looking at it with the little bit of background that I have, it can be overwhelming to the average person who clearly doesn't understand the structure of our government even, to look at this and understand the tsunami that's coming. And I think that was why it was so easy for everyone to, turn a blind eye to it at the time of the election. But now this tsunami is also overwhelming people. So breaking it down into palatable bites for different communities as to what this part is doing to you, and this is what we need to combat. And perhaps doing a more specialized attack along those lines. I don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, and from a healthcare perspective, obviously the healthcare industry is a major corporation, right? This is a very profitable system, and it is a disease management system, not a wellness system, right? So, and the other thing I just want to say about it with regard to women's health is that there doesn't even exist a women's health, paradigm in this world, right? We are being experimented on by pharmaceutical interventions that were tested only on men and mostly like male monkeys, actually, and male animals. So there's a big problem. Okay, so then we've been operating under the assumption that female physiology is exactly the same as that of a man, and it's just simply not true. Fortunately,
most people in Congress think that, though.
That's
Nobody
right.
in Congress thinks.
So, I think I guess I just want to empower women that, we might think that we want our healthcare insurance and our healthcare, system, but it really is not helpful to us in so many cases. And, from my perspective, if I can't really accept insurance, because then I have to practice medicine that is not in my patient's best interest, because what the insurance company says that I should do for my patient is not necessarily what I believe is in their best interest. So that's why I don't take insurance, right? Because if you wanted a monkey for the pharmaceutical industry, then you're going to have to go down the street to a different clinic, because I don't play that game. I'm never going to, do something that's not in my best interest just because that's the only way I get paid. And that's how you get paid in the system as a physician, is to, name and blame disease, divide and conquer, and you're only trained to use hammer. So all you see is nail. And this is just not productive. So, and like with regard to hormones and hormone replacement therapy, I mean, it's so tragic the way we have misunderstood this topic. And, giving synthetic progestin, which was the only way the pharmaceutical, industry could make money off of hormones, because, they're bioidentical from yam, right? But we have to make it profitable. So we turn it into synthetic progestin derived from pregnant horses' urine and start putting this in birth control pills and giving it to women. And it turns out that does cause problems. Major problems in the female body. So, go figure, taking something outside of its bioidentical form is not helpful to women, but we're still just trying to figure that out and dig ourselves out of this hole. So there are just so many problems. So I guess that was my point. And why now? Because, women are waking up. They're like, wait a minute, SSRIs are not my problem. I shouldn't be dismissed, called crazy. My experience is real, and I want real help for these symptoms that I'm having. And so conventional doctors just simply are not equipped to help them. So, I believe that there always would be a moment where we need to combine the best of Eastern modalities and the best of indigenous and, traditional healing modalities that conventional medicine and the patriarchy has done their best to stomp out. But, I'll tell you, remember, as women, we remember, and all we have to do is remember and bring those forward. And this is really, in my opinion, the way we're going to move forward from a health and wellness perspective.
And I think, when we look at it, this is why they're trying to erase history. I mean, there's just a concerted effort to just not even have it available. Like when you have textbooks being written by, these very, very conservative think tanks or whatever, and placed in schools, it's really, really alarming to think that kids are going to start thinking that, people coming over and being brought into slavery, well, that was their choice because they were immigrants. That's what they're calling them these days. Not slaves, but immigrants.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah, and I think the door has been opened by that idea of American exceptionalism, right? Because when you think everything is fine, you get complacent. So then you're thinking, okay, well, we don't need to do anything more. And as American people, I think we kind of have to shoulder a little blame for this as well, because of that complacency.
Yeah.
Because, the founding fathers, and I know this is going to sound weird coming from an Indigenous person, but, the founding fathers had a vision. They talked about this land of the free, and life, liberty, justice for everyone, right? But then you get to the Constitution, and it specifically starts excluding Black people. It starts excluding Indigenous people. And it starts looking at, okay, this person is like 3/16 of a human, But they still had a vision, right? And back then it was 13 colonies. And that's not a lot of people. And the idea, when you look at democracy, when you look at our Constitution, all of these things, and I know this probably has to do with an educational change too, but growing up, I was taught that these were living documents. They were meant to grow. They were meant to change as we grew as a nation. And our nation has grown. We are kind of like a melting pot of so many different cultures, so many different people, of languages, and we all have our own histories. And we all have our own histories within specifically the confines of the U.S. government, right? And our own relationships with that. And I think we've gotten really complacent because of the way that they have whitewashed history, that we forget the struggles that we've gone through as Americans to make sure that we continue progressing, and that we're not a perfect country, that there is always room for improvement. And so this pushback on history is really to drive that complacency again, to make people more comfortable to where they're not questioning. They're not asking questions about why this person is being impacted by this. Because America is so great. We're not racist. We're not sexist. We're not transphobic. Everything's fine. Look, don't look at us, you know.
Yeah.
But a lot of that is just to make us complacent, right? And I see this pushback of history. You know, they're like, it's anti-American. It's not anti-American. This is just the truth. And the reality with history is that there are always going to be multiple versions and multiple perspectives, because our lived experiences through those events are going to be vastly different from each other because of, you know, the environment around us. Our, you know, what proximity do we have to these different power structures? It's going to be very different. And it's going to be very hard to realize, you know, the ways that we benefit or the ways that we perpetuate these systems of oppression too. So I think the door was open because American exceptionalism has been pushed for so long that we as American people have been more than happy to relinquish our power, to give it over, just to not worry about it. Oh, that's why we got leadership. That's why we got representatives. That's their job. We're not political people. But democracy and even the wholeness and wellness of this country is our responsibility as the people, because it was supposed to be for the people, by the people. And I think the great thing about what's happening now, though, is that we are starting to realize how much power we've relinquished, and we're starting to wake up and starting to take that power back, and especially as women. And that makes me just, you know, so thrilled. And people are like, how are you so optimistic in this landscape, you know, with all the terrible things going on? And it's because I see the work that's being done by women. I see that progress that's being made. But I see it with our youth. I see the work that they are doing, the things that they are achieving and stepping up into this battle. Like, they shouldn't have to, right? But they are. The progress that they are making as youth is just so incredible to me. And so, like, I already feel like, yes, this is going to be the dark part, right? It's always darkest before dawn. But I think eventually, because of the way I see women stepping into their power, the way that I see our youth stepping into their power, the way I see the rest of us just kind of like waking up and being like, oh, okay, we can do better, imagining better for our future. You know, that's what keeps me optimistic. And I feel like we've already won. And I feel that's why there's such a violent backlash right now against that, because they know that they've lost everything.
But I also think that we would be remiss if we don't look at what the major system that is trying to keep us down is, and that's religion.
Yeah.
And somehow we're going to have to defang that along with.
Do we have any words on board?
I thought you were going to say
it needs to be defanged. It needs to be taxed. And it needs to be taken out of our government. That is the slip that has been, since the moral majority in Reagan, those are the people who have been focusing this entire battle and using women as the cudgel in order to split apart our society.
Yeah.
Right.
It's kind of funny. I was just having this conversation on Blue Sky because technically I am Reverend Johnny J. And
yeah, we need women.
Background is in biblical studies, and I come from a long line of preachers, which in Indian country is kind of taboo, right? But I feel like within Native communities, Christianity is very different in a lot of aspects because my grandpa was a boarding school survivor. And I think coming from that background of him being oppressed religiously, of having his identity attacked through religion, being removed from his home, I think one of the main reasons that he stepped into that role to be a preacher was to try and reclaim Christianity for what he believed it to be, right? And even for me, like a big part of Native cultures is accountability. So when I think of Christianity, you know, the way that they have moved from faith and free will, which is talked about expressively within the Bible, like nobody is responsible for your sin except for you. Nobody can tempt you into sin except for you. It all deals with accountability, right? And the same within Native communities. It's all about accountability for your actions, for your words, and the impact that they have on the world around you. Be a good relative. And that was the church that I grew up in. But it has moved so much from faith and free will and freedom within faith, to indoctrination and subjugation. Like in a way that I boggle my mind, like just hearing people talk about Christianity, good people I know that go to church, hearing the way that they talk about it compared to the way that I grew up, and I grew up old school Pentecostal, is so night and day. And I'm just like, how do you think that this is Christian-like behavior? How do you think this is a Christian belief? How do you think that this is possibly how God would want you to act towards his other creations, towards his other children? It boggles my mind, but I see it exactly like you said, like it's because of the way that religion has mixed with politics. It used to be night and day, but now politics are being taught from the pulpit, while our government is also teaching religion through policy. And it just creates a whole environment just set up for us to be subjugated and to be oppressed through religion.
Yes.
If you look at the history of how the abortion or anti-abortion movement began, it all started with wanting to maintain power and control. And abortion was this issue that they could latch onto that would give them a cause that, was like a winning cause, so to speak. There's a number of like really, really great podcasts that talk about like how everything unfolded. And it started out with religious figures trying to figure out how they could get into a political, into politics in a way that wouldn't get them in trouble because of the laws and everything. And abortion was the issue.
Yeah. I wanted to bring up also one thing that I heard was Americans have, this is an amazing quote, Americans have mistaken convenience for freedom. Right? So we can take away all the things as long as they can have their DoorDash, or as long as they can Amazon or whatever. Like, it doesn't matter if you have rights, as long as you can get what you need brought to your door. So the impact of these laws and these changes in this administration, what does the backlash mean for our health, our education, our economic stability? I know we've touched on some of this, but especially for marginalized communities.
I think I totally agree with Johnny. I'm more optimistic than I've ever been in a lot of ways, because I think when we are living in our comfort zone, it's very easy to forget where we come from and the struggles. Like, I was at the dentist one day, we were talking about my initiative, and she said she brought up this book to her daughter, who is like 17. And her daughter was like, "Oh, Mom, that's like ridiculous. That never really happened." Doubting that, things like having to have an abortion in a back alley, or, having to go through a series of, underground, contacts to, exercise that right. And there's so much going on that's dismantling the systems that are in place, that we have this opportunity to say, okay, well, if you want to dismantle that, we're going to approach it this way and leave you in the dust. Because again, like, when you're so complacent, when you have all those conveniences and you think that life is just ducky, you're just gonna go along with the flow. But when things get so uncomfortable that you have to go out and you have to march on a beautiful October day, what was it, 7 million people out there, and I don't think that even counted. I'm sure that there were a lot of people that would have liked to have gone that didn't. So I'm very optimistic.
I'm very optimistic too, and I really think that's the most important thing from a health perspective is, the hope and optimism, and because the currency of control right now is the fear, right? So keeping women in a high cortisol state, in this sympathetic nervous system response where you're constantly, wrestling with the patriarchy or whatever, right? That's a very good way to keep us in a very hard place to heal our bodies, right? But if we can remain optimistic, come together, gather in community, learn regenerative health practices, get back into our body and find safety from within our bodies. I really think this is the protection we can find, because we're so focused on achieving safety from the external environment, right? And we need to flip that around, and we totally have the power to do so. So I'm excited.
Yeah. In the program that we've developed that Lisa was kind enough to help us name, it's called Beyond Survival, 4 Pillars to Rise and Rebuild. And when we first started putting it together, we went from the first pillar, which was based on narrative storytelling and a reader's guide, to validate women's experience with both domestic and financial abuse. But the second pillar, we originally designed it to be kind of like an escape plan. And then all of a sudden it occurred to us, the thing that we need more than anything is fortifying ourselves and taking care of ourselves. So what we did was we rebuilt that pillar, and it's all around self-care. It's all about learning how to meditate and ground yourself, so that when you get to that point where you are ready to leave, where you're squirreling away money so that you can have like a secret bank account or whatever, that you are battling, or you've already battled the self-esteem issues, and you know how important well-being is. So I couldn't agree with you more.
Yeah, thank you for all of that optimism. I think it's really important. And I will also say that I think that it's still really important to keep our eyes and ears open, especially in a system, in a situation where media and the stories of women who are dying in hospitals and who are unable to get access to the healthcare they need are being suppressed because our media is allowing that to happen, right? And so I think at the same time, it's a matter of amplification of and awareness of those stories, because optimism is really important. It's also really important not for those stories not to get buried, and for those stories to kind of be overlooked at the same time.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I
Yes,
agree
absolutely.
with that, because it is easy to be optimistic. Not totally easy, but it is easier, right? Because optimism depends on you being able to look away, to withdraw yourself, to pull back from something that is impactful, to hope and to faith, right? So I do think we do have to keep our eyes open. And I feel very fortunate, and I know this is going to sound weird to say, but being Indigenous, we're acutely aware that we were born into a history of violence, into a history of trauma. And, it doesn't end. It's still ongoing. The things that our ancestors went through are still happening now in various ways. I have a lecture that I do about the pattern of anti-indigeneity. And it's about how all of these things that we've gone through just continue to repeat themselves through different periods of time. Removal, we think of, when you hear removal, you think of the Trail of Tears, but you don't think about the way that tribes are still being displaced through climate change, and being removed from their lands as pipelines are being built. the way that impacts and still has people being removed from their communities. And now it's not just us, it's other people as well, right? And, when you look at not just removal, but you also look at assimilation, they're trying to homogenize humanity into
Yes.
just this one very narrow scope of what it is to be human, of what it is to be American. And when you really look at what that means, it means no culture, no language, no community. It's all about an individual idea. And that idea is very shallow and empty. And you look at the way that people have been assimilated into that, right? They talk about patriotism, they talk about nationalism, they talk about Americanism. But when you really ask them about it, they don't have anything to respond with. They don't know what an American culture is. They don't know what the language is, aside from English, which point out that English is a foreign language, and they just like, wait, what? No. But it's like, yeah, that came from overseas, right? There were thousands of languages that are indigenous to this land that you don't know. And you're talking with one language. Out of all the countries in the world, the US is one of the only countries that is monolingual, right? And we pride ourselves on that when we shouldn't. We should be multilingual because we are part of a global community. And yet we've isolated ourselves through this idea that we are the greatest country on earth. So why would we need to do or be anything else? So we forgot that kind of link to our humanity. So there is, we have to kind of be open to all this. And there is a fear, like I talk about this a lot in the work that I do, that as Indigenous people, we are post-apocalyptic people. We've already been through several apocalypses in our lives and we're still here. And yes, we're still hurt people, but we've also learned how to heal from that, how to move forward from that in various ways. And it's not perfect. And there's still, a lot of tragedy. There's still a lot of death that occurs because of this. But at the end of the day, what still drives us is that hope for a better future and knowing that we can survive because we've done it before and will continue to survive. And so I think that is the model. Like when you're looking at ways, how do we move forward from this? Look at Indigenous communities. We've already been there, done that several times. And we're still doing it in various ways. And all the work that we do as Indigenous people has never just been centered on what is best for Native communities, because our liberation is everyone else's as well. Because we were free. We know what it is to be free and sovereign people. And our blood remembers that. Those memories stay in our blood. And that's why we keep struggling for better, to keep doing more, like to progress, not just for us, but for everyone else too, because we realize that this country has grown. These lands have grown. And we are all relative. And so we have to be good relatives to each other. So we're not exclusionary in the work that we do. When you talk about land back, that's not just for our benefit, but for the benefit of everyone else as well.
Right. And this sort of leads to the next question of how does fear and misinformation create division amongst women who should be standing together, right? We should be standing together, but they're creating this division between us. And there are a lot of pieces to this, obviously. We've touched on a lot of them, whether it's religion or taking away our health care. But I mean, to me, honestly, it goes back to religion because it's what you believe. And if you believe that trans is bad because the Bible says so, then that's creating division. If you believe that abortion is bad because the Bible says so, that's creating division. If you believe that, your neighbor needing SNAP benefits is bad, whatever it is creating division, right?
I mean, I would say so much of what is going on with the trans community is the division they're trying to create.
Yeah.
I don't have the stat ahead of me, excuse me, but it was 30 to 40% of people say they know a trans person. It's very easy to villainize somebody who's just a title and a name. And I see cis women like hurt my community when we've been saying for years. I mean, we've been battling. It's 2023 that we've been protesting on a consistent basis mostly alone early on in the camaraderie and everything, but it's not unanimous. And again, I mean, Lisa, I kind of giggled when you said the Bible says against trans, like it's not in there, right?
It's not.
Like,
No, it's not.
Not anywhere.
But in the American version that the Heritage Foundation has put out there, I am anti-Christian, therefore I am anti-American. Anyone who doesn't fit the mold is that way. And it is creating, I mean, I love that this room is together. This is what gives me hope, this room that we're talking in right now. But, you know, there are people who like look like the rest of this group who would be against me simply because their preacher tells them, some man tells them, whatever it is. And yeah, this is hope, this is connection, and getting over that and recognizing it and the education that we offer. I mean, one of my ways I love, like, I'm so positive, I love the like super hopeful, is I love people to know me because like it's hard to hate me, right? Like I just like smile and have pink hair and people like it. So they want to villainize me before you get to know me.
I've spoken
Right.
to quite a few people recently about, you know, they bring it up apropos of nothing, and they'll talk to me about this stuff and how afraid they are of trans. And what I have come to find is not one of them understands the process at all. I used to, when I was in the medical field, I worked at a hospital where we had one wing back in the late 70s where it was predominantly for sex changes. I got tons of fashion tips, and I also learned what the entire process was and how long and how much time it takes and how intensive it is in order to prevent mistakes. And most people don't understand that because what they hear is that thumbnail version that, oh my God, you can go to grade school in the morning where they won't give you a Tylenol, but doggone it, you can get your sex changed and come back, you know, in the afternoon. And these people, for whatever reason, the lack of education, believe it.
Yeah.
So I find more and more, and it's easy to explain once someone wants it explained to them.
But
So,
that's exactly it, Kimberly, the lack of education.
mhm.
So why take history out of books? Why take things out, you know?
I
why-
lived in Georgia when my kids were in junior high. I had to reteach them the Civil War. I understand exactly what you're saying.
if we take history out of books and we take teaching out of schools and we're just teaching the Bible, then
Well, that's
then
what they
people, that's the whole point, right? The whole point
Mhm.
is if we're not educated,
Right.
then we will believe these things, and then they can have their way.
Yeah.
But it's lazy. It's lazy. Have you ever heard something that sounded like, oh, okay, I send my kids to school in the morning and they come back somebody else, and not
Yeah,
thought
but
to
they
yourself,
believe
gotta
people
look
are
that up.
eating dogs and cats.
I know, but this is, it's beyond education. It is an entire lack of curiosity.
It is.
Yeah.
Actually,
So
you know, also they believe that kids in schools are providing litter boxes
Yeah.
for kids.
Yeah,
You know, it's this ridiculous notion. Like, and it's kind of funny too because when you talk to people, they all have their own personal anecdotes. And I can't remember the name right off of it, but I think back to this article I read, and they were talking about how there was a study of fear. And it's a tactic that a lot of cults use, right, to brainwash and to control, but they instill fear.
Mhm.
And
Of
I
course.
think it was around the 70s or 80s, right, when the U.S. government started to try and experiment with this in various ways through the media. And media has always been a mirror, right, the things that we create, but they've actually kind of stepped into this thing where they were backing filmmakers. And we start to see it even more blatantly now. For example, Top Gun, Maverick,
Yeah.
you know, where they do have military backing. They have, like, they're active participants in creating these films, allowing them to use their jets, allowing them to use their bases to create these propaganda films. And through every single one of these, they create fear. And you see it very subtly, you know, and we see it more. Like sometimes the enemy is Muslim for no other reason than they're Muslim, you know, and because of things that happened after 9/11, right?
Well,
Before
I remember where I remember when the Russians were
Yeah, that's what I grew up with.
Remember
Russians were the enemy. It was, and before that it was the Vietnamese, and before that it was the Germans, and before that.
And it's to use the media to instill this fear in ways that we don't always recognize, right? And as media literacy has pretty much gone out the window, so has people's ability to tell the difference between what's real and what's not. And so we do have a lot of fear about each other, but also because we're also still very segregated, right? Like a lot of people don't recognize me as being a Native person. I'm here in LA, and the number of Filipino grandmas and aunties who have tried to send me their sons and just refuse to believe that I'm not Filipino.
Yeah.
You know? But it's that we just don't have enough proximity to each other to like really understand, you know, who we really are outside of this propaganda that we're being fed in various ways. You know, like for me, I grew up in Oklahoma and a red state. I grew up old school Pentecostal, but I also grew up within a very queer community because Oklahoma has a very rich queer history that a lot of people don't know about. You know, there are like, we have Miss Gay Oklahoma, and that started in the 70s. I've had relatives who have participated in that pageant. So I remember going and helping to do makeup for this pageant. And it was always just something that was there, and nobody batted an eye in conservative Oklahoma, right? Fast forward to now, and this was like the 80s, 90s when I was growing up in this, but you fast forward to now, and everything is so anti-trans, anti-queerness. And I'm just like, how did this happen? Because Oklahoma had such a rich, and it still does, a very thriving queer community that is now villainized, where it used to be accepted. And if not accepted, just kind of ignored and left alone for the most part. But now there's just so much blatant violence and vilification that happens. And I'm just like, you guys are forgetting your real history as Oklahomans here. You know, education in Oklahoma. I give a lot of credit to my educational background to the schools that I went to in Oklahoma. But now I have nieces and nephews, and I'm just like, they're so far behind compared to where I was. And even education, when I was going to school, we were like, I think we were like 14th or 15th, right, in the nation. And now we're at the very bottom. Like we're like 49 or 50. And it doesn't, like, to me, people are like, well, it doesn't matter. You're safe in California. And yeah, I do have a lot of protections here, right? Because our government here is actively fighting against Trump. They're not giving in to his demands. But I still have relatives in Oklahoma. I still have loved ones there. And I still have friends who are, you know, in the fight, like trying to make Oklahoma better, and they're at risk. So it does still impact me in a lot of ways. And Oklahoma is still my home, no matter where I am in the world. So, you know, it does matter what happens there. So, you know, I think of all these things, and it's just, you know, like we got to keep that optimism, but at the same time, like we got to realize like this, not like all of this is just, we're backsliding. Like, and I think that's one of the things we need to somehow try and get out in the world is like, look at all the progress we made that did better for us as American people. But look how much worse it is now that we're starting to backslide on all of this, that we're starting to roll back these rights, because it's not getting better for anybody. It's just getting worse for us all.
I'd love to jump in. Oh, sorry, Lisa, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Yeah, of course. I'd love to jump in just on two quick points, and I promise I'll let us move on. The first is really around this information piece. So I am very proud to be one of the litigators in one of the cases in Arizona where we were representing two trans girls who wanted to participate in school sports. And one of the best cases I've ever worked on, and we ended up, succeeding for them and have an injunction in place that allowed trans girls in Arizona to participate in sports. But on the opposite side, one of the really interesting things was reading the government briefing, not just for the complete and utter lack of scientific evidence, et cetera, that they put forward, but more so this broadeningification, I guess you could say, right? We're talking about two trans girls in a history of maybe 10 girls wanting to play sports over more than 2 decades in schools in Arizona. And you have government counsels saying things like an influx of trans girls want to participate in sports and take over girls' sports in elementary school. And it's this real straw man argument of, what are you talking about, an influx? Like, we're talking about two girls. We're talking about two girls who want to be a part of a team, who want to feel like they are supported and part of a team. That's all we're talking about here.
Mhm.
And I think that just goes to this idea of this misinformation, but also this fear that's created around the fear of being othered or being the other, and creating this us and them broad ideology that, you know, that really stuck out to me, kind of being on that case and listening to government counsel. Hazel, I saw you unmuted. I'd love to have you jump in.
Yeah, the numbers you were talking about, it's everywhere. As far as the very small number in Kansas, we have a legislature that's bigger. They're debating this than the number of trans athletes being affected, right? I mean, you're talking about hundreds of legislators affecting 5, I think was the number of athletes. But what I find so interesting is this fear and the idea of fairness is excluding a group. Like when I start saying like this fairness in sports, but you're excluding people. You're excluding kids who want to play soccer with their mates. Like that's what fairness looks like to you. And then I won't get into the obsession with the sports culture and literally the distraction that is sports. But it's this another way to like wedge people against each other. And that we have to seek fairness, and we're not taking money. And back in the day when the Olympics allowed trans athletes, you had requirements. I think it was Kimberly who mentioned all the requirements that go into the transition process, a medical transition process. And you had to be like a year into hormones. And let me tell you, like, I have lost weight just simply because I've been on hormones and I don't have the testosterone. Like I'm different after these years. Like it affects us, and they required that. They required the testing. All these things were in place before, but it became a fairness issue, a cultural issue, a fear issue.
And can we
I find
not?
it really interesting. The people who are really afraid and make the biggest fuss about trans athletes are men. Do you remember Renee Richardson? She was playing tennis in the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody made a fuss about that. A couple of guys said something or another, but it was largely ignored. She played on the professional tournament for years and years and years. And then suddenly now it's a deal.
Exactly. And nobody is making a stink about co-ed sports that still exist. Colleges have co-ed intramural teams. For the most part, when you're a kid, you grow up playing co-ed soccer, co-ed baseball. And it's not until you're like in junior high that it becomes women's basketball or men's basketball, you know, and nobody is railing against that even now. Like nobody's talking about, okay, well, if we're going to say it's not fair for trans people to participate in sports, then that should also translate to other sports, right? Like to youth league. But they're not making us think about that because it's not really about fairness.
No.
And we all forget, like, I think they realize that the public kind of forgets about the existence of co-ed sports, which is funny because so many adults who no longer could play college or baseball or like basketball or whatever still participate in a lot of these co-ed intramural leagues, right? And yet they're still railing about fairness in sports. And I've played co-ed sports. And they like to say, oh, well, we're easy on. No, they are not.
No.
I have taken so many spikes to the head in playing volleyball, you know, where they don't go easy. They play it like as a woman, you're expected to keep up, right? Like that's co-ed sports. And there was this idea that women and men could play the same sports, you know, it depends on skill. And now they're trying to say it's about fairness. And it's like, really? Because I don't see you stop playing volleyball here.
Yeah.
So they say that why they build more pickleball courts.
Right. So where do we then, as women, find power in these when these systems themselves are built to suppress it? So what do we do?
It's very simple. She is me. I mean, it truly. I mean, the thing that I've come to recognize through my work, and it's like we have these experiences in common as women. And by building systems that support one another instead of breaking them down. I mean, I once I get to a certain point, I like, you know, as a writer, I want to write a one woman show, and it's the name of the show is called "She Didn't Age Well: Why the Women's Movement Needs a Facelift." And the bottom line is that we've been in a lot of ways our own worst enemy. We've torn each other apart. We're not supportive. Like when you look at the history of the waves of feminism, you know, they pitted like Black women against white women. Mostly the white women did not want, you know, lesbian women in there. We have done so much damage to the causes that, you know, would have moved us forward. And I think the big thing is that we have to recognize she is me. Even if we have separate experiences and different lives and we're not all the same, there is so much strength in what Lisa's doing and bringing us all together so that we can hear one another's stories and learn from them.
Well, and we're more alike than different, right?
Yes.
Our
Yes.
differences are so small.
Yeah.
One statistic that I wanted to bring up a little bit earlier about speaking English, right?
Mhm.
There are only less than 5% of the entire world's population speaks English as their only language.
Yeah.
Less than 5% of the world's population. That means, you know, this idea that English, you have to speak English, you have to speak English.
Mhm.
Nobody speaks English when you think about it. If you put everybody in a bucket, like this tiny little dot over here speaks English. Nobody, you know, everyone speaks English as a second language or a third or a fourth language. We are more alike than different. And we have to remember that as we move forward, as we build these programs and systems, that we are more alike than different. Because the differences are so minor, but they're the things that they are preying on, the people who built these systems, preying on these differences and pushing them, causing the fear, causing the disconnect on those differences, and have brainwashed so many of us to believe that those differences really make a difference. And they don't. And we have to remember that.
So beautiful. And I, you know, with regard to our healthcare and our bodies, right? How did we manage to cut the human body into like 160 subspecialists and like over 24 primary specialists? You know, like how did we do that? You know, like we're not only otherizing one another, but we're otherizing parts of our body. You know, it's like we have to remember to the like, you know, Chinese medicine, for example, was designed based on the energetic structures of the body and the physical structures and the living body. You know, conventional medicine is based on dead human body. And I don't think really Hippocrates meant to separate the soul from the body. It's not separate. It's like and so, you know, traditional indigenous healing traditions remember this holistic approach to healing. And we really need to bring that back. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry is and same with the supplement industry. It's a very reductionistic divide and conquer, you know, approach to health. You can't isolate, you know, these biochemical systems in the body, because guess what? We don't even understand. And we forget sometimes that science doesn't happen in laboratory. It happens in nature, right? So I agree. Thank you.
I'm just going to say I love you, Christy. I have lupus, so my body is separated like that. I have a cardiologist, an endocrinologist, and all of these different people to address something that is happening systemically inside of me. And it's so bonkers to me, right? Because, and I've been very fortunate that I have doctors who are very open to more holistic approaches, especially from like being open to letting me do my traditional medicines the way that I do. And understanding that I know when I have to do Western medicine, I will do it when necessary. But for the most part, like my body does not respond well. And it does have to do with women's health. You know, you were talking about this connection between mind and body, and we are talking about fear and keeping women's cortisol levels up and how harmful that is. And it's true, because if you look at autoimmune diseases among women, they are so much higher than any other population.
Yeah.
And within the indigenous community, for example, lupus, we're at 6 to 10 times more likely to develop lupus and at younger ages than any other population. And I do feel that a lot of that is tied to stress, to intergenerational trauma, from being removed from our traditional homelands, from being removed from our traditional diets, and placed in lands that aren't our own and forced to try and survive these violent systems. It does have an impact on our physical health. So I love what you've been saying in this panel, because I think that's one of the most important things we need to do, is that self-care, like trying to understand, like, we can't separate the two. And when it comes to how do we find that empowerment in each other, sisterhood, you know, when I need a recharge, it's not men I go to, you know, it's to my sisters, it's to my friends, because we do understand the differences in the way that we experience the world, those different experiences, and we are more alike. And I always think it's funny, because we're so similar. Just listening to this panel, I've just been in awe. Like, Hazel, I love you too, because you said something like, it's get to know me, it's hard to hate me. I say that all the time. I'm adorkable. You know, and I could talk about white supremacy. I could talk about systems of oppression. And where other people will get trolling, I get support, and I get very rare trolling. And it's because people get to know me first, and I'm adorkable. So it's kind of hard to hate me. And I love that, because that's what we need. And that's how we build community and solidarity, is
Right.
just having these conversations and supporting each other how we can. And we all have very different experiences and backgrounds and knowledges that may help somebody. It may be something that they didn't know they needed, that you're opening their world to, you know? And I think that is the most beautiful thing about sisterhood, is that just the ways that we constantly show up for each other. And like, yeah, we're all complicit in various ways of harming each other too, you know, because that's what the society has taught us that women should do. We should be catty. We should be this mean girl.
Yeah.
But we've also kind of awakened on our own. Like, that's not a thing. Like, the number of women I see saying, if you're a mean girl in your 40s, get therapy. That's so healing for me, right?
I had that
So
experience today online, a couple of new girls. But let's move on. Let's talk about what effective resistance looks like beyond protest, right? So we can go and protest, peaceful protests, they're effective, but how can we do this in daily life, in our leadership, and in policy influence?
Let's stop engaging with the systems and build circles, right? Like we're doing at She Gives Me Health. Like, you know, we can not continue to waste all of our power wrestling with these dysfunctional systems that are crumbling, you know, with their roots, right? They weren't built for us. They don't serve us. Let's build a new one. That's what I say. That's what we say.
Agree. Sometimes when I'm at events, people will come up and they'll say to me, "Thank you for your service," as if I was in the military. But I often feel like what I'm doing with the program is really triage. It's like what we're trying to do is we're trying to heal the women first that have been impacted by all this trauma through domestic violence or, you know, financial control, oppression, all these other things, so that as you know, more people are healed, they can get into their communities recovered and help, you know, the next person.
Right.
So yeah, that's pretty much what we have to do.
I'm curious, as far as a policy influence is concerned, what your view is on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple of things. I absolutely agree with stepping back from systems that are oppressing us. And I think what that means is, yes, we are protesting. That's an amazing first step. It then means being brave and taking the next step and stop participating in the economic systems that are oppressing us. I think the next real step that will have an impact immediately is a general strike. And I know that a lot of people are calling for that. And I think that that is important if that's something that is available.
Yeah.
And you know, it takes brave women in leadership to take that step and say, you know what are you going to do if 50% of your workforce is out of the economy?
Right.
For one day, what is going to happen to this economy? And what we know is that in this current system, those numbers and that stock market is really, really, really important to the people who are currently in power. And if this is a way that we can leverage our voices to actually take a stand and actually ask for something important, then that is kind of the way to, I think, the first next step.
I think
I
that's
think it's important that everyone brings something. Like everyone has utility, everyone has value, everyone has something to contribute in their own way. I mean, even this group, it's a variety of people all going towards the same direction and supporting each other how we can. Like I was listening to a story from a friend of mine, and this is what I was thinking of just earlier today. I'm like, oh my gosh, I went through that. This is what I did. And simply just something I've been through a year ago, offering support the way that I can without judgment, without concern, without just like, how do I help you? And with, the protests, I mean, if we have that, like, who's able to help somebody, who's able to offer food, cook food, who's doing childcare? If you can't walk in a protest, can you watch the little ones? Like there's things that we all can do, and everyone has value and is supportive, and making sure everyone knows that, because one of the fundamental parts of the system is telling us we don't have value, telling us we're not worthwhile, telling us we can't contribute without a man, we have to have this, and we're not smart enough, tall enough, whatever it is. But it's not true, and we have to remind ourselves of that.
right.
There's an awesome framework, actually. If I might just jump in with the social.
Sure.
Just jumping off of what Hazel said. It's by Deepa Iyer, Deepa. Her last name is Iyer, and it's this beautiful social change ecosystem which gives roles to different people. So are you a storyteller? Are you a weaver? Are you a leader? Are you a first responder? And I think it's a really beautiful way of trying to identify where your strengths are in a social movement and what you can do in this particular moment. And then I think the next thing that we have to do is look forward. We need women in leadership who are putting together policy and who are putting together education systems and health systems, regulatory oversight, civil service reform, legislation. We need women at the forefront of creating a new policy, right? We can't just be reactive all the time, right? And so that's kind of the next step as well.
Right. And so with everything that's happening and the political fatigue that's happening, how do we then stay engaged and informed while all of this is happening without, of course, burning out and just jumping off of a building, right? How do we, because sometimes, there are plenty of people who are just saying it's never going to get better and this is terrible and I don't want to be here anymore. There's plenty of people. It's happening every day. So how do we then stay engaged and informed and help others during this time?
I think the communications is the biggest deal right now, because the reason why people feel apathetic is because they're consistently being told there's nothing going forward. And this has been going on for quite a while. The reason why people will indulge in supplements rather than think about their body as whole is because advertising has been telling us forever that they don't tell us it's because our food is inadequate. They tell us we need these supplements. They take one study that says, geez, maybe a glass of wine every night might be good for you. And they bury all of those that say it raises your cancer rate. Communications is what has dumbed down America communications. Look at how many religious movies they're putting out right now. All of these movies, if they are not religious movies, they are superhero movies making men think they can go out there and fight everything and survive, or they're disaster movies where everything is coming to kill us and we don't even bind together then. I think the basic premise of advertising movies and everything else is to stoke capitalism, of course, but also in order to stoke capitalism, they have to keep us divided. That's how they get money from us. That's how you have people who really insist that other people are not worth this much to be paid or worth having health care or whatever. And they have taken over our media systems predominantly. It would be cool if we could figure out how to have a female dominated, oriented channel on YouTube, perhaps, like Midas Touch or something to that effect, that we have consistently running with different things that consistently counteract what's being said out there. Does that sound like way too big a thing?
No, in fact, Kimberly, we are actually in the process of building that. So
Yeah. But I just think that is going to be one of the major spears of this, is because we can create all kinds of systems, but if we have a huge conglomerate telling everybody that this is not going to work,
It's
then we
not just they're telling us it's not going to work. It's like, look at the way that language has changed in the
Exactly.
last couple of years. And that's why, some people have said, well, why did you pick a name so long? I know why she stayed. Because it says the whole story in 5 words. I mean, people walk up to it and it's like, oh my God, they totally get it. Because the way that language is used, I mean, I had a friend that said to me, "You're not woke, are you?" It's like, look at where, like DEI, they're not like defining diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's just that they use this acronym and it's like, it sounds evil. So the way that language is used is so important. And going to your point, Kimberly, it's like, we need to tell one another's stories. We need to be invested in the narrative part of, it sounds kind of silly, but they've got history, but how many of us are so aware of, the impact that women have made in the past, and the like our contributions to our society? It's basically erased. So yeah, it's like telling our stories is really important.
And I think it's education. I mean,
That
telling
is so
stories.
powerful.
Yeah, education, like their education system is meant to fill the capitalist system we
Yes.
have. And the education, I have 2 teenagers who are making a lot of noise upstairs, but I'm like learning more about the education system from their perspective and how it's all about sit down. We were telling 5-year-olds to sit in a desk and start reciting capitals, like what, that's not critical thinking. It's just like responsive and memorization, being like told, like the education system is sit down and do what I say. And I think we have to break that or offer an alternative, which is the stories, the narratives. Casey, I was like, yes, that's exactly right. And but it's education as much as it is sharing. It's this getting better and improving towards the thing that we want in the whole world.
This is so important because, the feminine voice is the nervous system of the collective. Okay. And what I mean by that is like language is the first technology of power, right? It's frequency. Our nervous system translates language into the nervous system, and language controls perception. And women have the power to control this illusion if we just take that power back. So what's being said, I completely agree. And yes, before there were any laws or institutions, there was our story, and our words. So let's come back to that. Let's bring that back, and let's bring our power back and regain control of reality, really.
Right.
And
And
that's
really what
the
we
beauty of storytelling, right? Is that it does connect like current threats, current struggles to actual lived realities of many different people in many different ways. And, I love what Kimberly said, because, that's part of what drives my work. I'm the founder of Red Pop News. I also founded a tribe called Yeet to start changing the perception that people have of Indigenous people as stagnant, primitive people, when we've always been doctors, when we've been historians, when we've been storytellers, when we've always been innovating. And so that's why I create the media that I do, so people can start seeing us as who we are, as more contemporary Indigenous people rather than just relics of the past, and start seeing the contributions that we make, not just on local levels, but on state and, global levels as well, because that really does change the story of who Indigenous people are. And I think that's so important, especially as women, that we reclaim our narrative, because almost every media is so ridiculous that is created about women by men, right?
Mhm.
Like the way that they describe us, like our skin is caramelly or milky, or it's like, why are we food based? Like these delusions.
It's better
it's
than
also-
sandpaper.
One thing that we've done with She Is Me recently, and that we're relaunching our website, is really just all about amplifying women's voices, right? That we came together to tell stories, but we really needed to expand in a way that we amplified women's voices in multiple ways. So yes, there's a stage. There is it's in print, it's in books, it's through our communication channels, it's through our podcast, it's through all the ways that we can distribute and show up and educate and empower and inspire women with our voices. And we talked about this yesterday, how some women aren't quite ready to speak. So we created a publishing arm so that women could write their stories, so that we can listen to their voices and raise their voices up. So with that being said, let's move on, because we've got a couple more questions. But when we think about solidarity, across race, class, faith, political identity, and it seems so hard to get there, right? It seems so hard to get there. But what does that look like, and what gets in the way?
I think Casey said it earlier, she is me, right? And I think solidarity means not only coming together in community, but also making sure that we center the voices of those who are most impacted in any given moment, right? So it's creating community and also lifting up the voices of people who need it the most, right? I don't know if when Black Lives Matter in 2020, when those protests were happening, I had a lot of conversations with family and with friends around, why is this important? Blue lives matter, da 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 da. And it was this constant conversation of, well, if you're in a neighborhood and one person's house is on fire and one person needs to fix a door frame or something, whose house are you going to address first? The person whose house is on fire, right? That's the emergency. And so I think there's also this element of understanding that we need to stand with each other and make sure that we are amplifying the places where the houses are on fire, right? And solving for that and making sure that that is at the forefront of our conversations. I think that's also the thing that can be something that gets in the way, right? Because everyone has an agenda. And I think that one of the protests in DC really amplified this particular issue, which is that everybody has an agenda. And there was a rally in DC, and it was around democracy, but there were about 10 different political organizations who had come with their own agendas and were standing in front of a rally and throwing, it's like the kitchen sink, at all these rally goers. And that kind of lack of focus as well often can get in the way. And again, that's why it's most important to really, okay, let's stand with each other and let's center people's voices where they are most impacted in this moment.
Beautiful. How can movements like She Is Me help shift this from resistance to reconstruction? So we're talking about building new systems instead of fighting the old ones.
I mean, I really believe that it's a disconnection crisis, obviously, like we've kind of been saying, and however we can reconnect to ourselves and reconnect to the earth and reconnect to one another, this connection will really re-stabilize our nervous systems and allow us to connect our nervous systems, and that will become much more powerful than each of us trying to run around independently, in sort of a divide and conquer way, right? That's sort of feeding into their paradigm. Yeah, that's my professional and personal opinion, is that the more we can really come home to ourselves and really open up our energy centers to connect with one another, which is very intuitive for us, believe it or not, once we get into it, that will really strengthen us as a collective.
And stop believing that we don't have the answers. Like we do, Chrissy, you said it, like we have, if we keep going towards the dreams that we have, like we can get there, and ignore the voices that say it's stupid or you can't do that or whatever it is. You won't get a job. You need to get health care. You need to be married. All these things, like those are what society's telling us. And if we're disagreeing, like it's okay. The noble sacrifice just needs to go away. Like the idea that we have to sacrifice for this, that, and the other, and trust ourselves and trust one another. And I've been there before. You'll do it, and like believe it. And then when I hear that, believe it as well and be grateful for it. Like we have the answers within us. You just have to like trust that we know it, or we know the people who can help.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
we build what should have been in the first place because, like I mentioned earlier, that blueprint was kind of left for us, a land of the free, home of the brave, life, liberty, justice, and for all. Like that was the blueprint. That was the dream. And so it's not really like having to rebuild something new, which we do have to do, but it's realizing that it's what should have been already. It's what should have happened, but we allowed ego, we've allowed these systems of oppression to come in and disrupt that, to even disconnect us from each other as human beings. So it's like kind of going back and just reclaiming what was already there and just building from that.
Mm-hmm. We are going to wrap up with this last question and give everyone a chance to answer. But what is your personal call to action for women who might be watching this? One thing that we can do now to defend our rights, protect each other, and reclaim our power.
I'm happy to start. I guess I would say build the habit of community and build the habit of joy. I think those two things are very powerful tools of resistance.
I agree.
I would say, start with love, if possible, in yourself, and stop outsourcing your power, because we are so addicted to outsourcing our power. In medicine, it's insane, right? Like we're constantly outsourcing our biology to systems and machines and other technologies. I can assure you, the human body is the most advanced technology on this planet. We've just forgotten how to use it. And if we can come together and remember how to use our biology, this is so powerful. So please stop outsourcing your power and identify where you're wasting your power in, rage or like being angry at, all these places we leak our power all over the place. Try to bring it back into your body and hang out with your sisters, and in community and really trying to harness that.
Thank you.
I think holding gratitude for the people around us and gratitude for what we've done. I mean, celebrate. We're told not to celebrate, not to showboat, but celebrate the successes we have, set goals, set like accomplishments, and cheer each other on, knowing that like sometimes we won't, like it'll be a lot of negativity, but that one little voice of gratitude from someone, have those gratitude partners, have those, people holding us accountable and celebrating with us.
I'm going to say that I find, for me, I don't have a huge footprint going on, but I find oftentimes, because I am an eavesdropper and I tend to listen in on other people's conversations all of the time, there have been a lot of circumstances where just as I get into conversation with people at the grocery store or whatever, I can educate them about something that they have gotten completely miscombobulated on due to misinformation that's being spread everywhere. And it comes from not understanding how our system works, all the way to thinking that everything they hear on the news is correct. I just had a huge argument with my brother-in-law, who's a Fox News watcher. And what that man believes to be true and believes to be going on in this world is so 180 degrees from what is actually happening that I find one of the best things I can do is just to keep reinforcing reality to people, because it seems to be in short supply, actually.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think, I think the best thing that we can do, especially as women, is really to just give each other the support that we need in any way that we can, whether it's through mentoring, whether it's through advocating, funding, and amplifying each other's voices. We have this idea in Indian country that when one of us rises, we all rise. And I think as women, we need to embrace that more and really invest in each other's success, because it's not an individual win. It's for our entire community and for the betterment of not just us as women or our communities, but for the world, because, we are those problem solvers. And I don't want to say we're the better and smarter sex, but come on.
We are. I mean, it's obvious.
And I
It's
would
never really been a compliment,
I
let's
would
be
just
honest.
really what I said previously is just to remember that we're more alike than different, and that we all come from the same place, and we are all the same inside, and we just need to I think do more blocking of what's happening out there, and concentrate more on community and on ourselves and helping our sisters and helping our families, our chosen families as well. Just with whatever it is, you need to cry, you need to scream, you need to talk, you need a hug, you need a meal, you need whatever. Like, I'm like, what if you need any of those things, just come to my house. Like, that's how I am. Like, whatever you need, you come on over and we'll take care of it. But we need that community. We need that family. And we've been isolated so much, and COVID sort of thrust us into something that we had never experienced. And so many people got comfortable in that. And our systems were built around that isolation, right? They were built up around that isolation. So now, like I mentioned, food delivery and Amazon and everything. And you saw those numbers of those corporations and those billionaires and how much money they made from our isolation. So keeping us isolated is profitable. So the best thing we can do is come together, be together, share, support each other. And that is our resistance. That is our success. So thank you all for joining us today. I appreciate all of you. I do. Thank you so much for taking time out and being here with me, and for supporting She Is Me. And thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the weekend, and we will all see you again soon.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you, Lisa.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.